Well, thank you, Fiona, for coming here and talking to us today about Shakespeare, and it's the 400th anniversary of his death, so lots of people are going to be talking about it. And I know that you have a great interest in Shakespeare, and you're very famous for the things that you've played and your interest in the Bard's work. So one thing that you said that really interested me was that the importance of reading aloud Shakespeare, in contrast to what we often experience at school, which is you get the book, you read it, and it's all kind of very internal to you. Why is it important to read him out loud?
Shakespeare is something I came to quite late in adulthood, and I'm quite glad that is the case, because I think he gives you a tool with which to hear the things you've said already in your life. He takes ordinary speech, he sometimes turns it into verse, and it sounds like ordinary speech. Now, it doesn't when you sit down and you look at it like that. But the moment you speak it aloud, you often hear one thing. You can hear the words that jump, and when a word jumps, it usually is a key to a deeper aspect of the person speaking. So I don't think you need to have any knowledge to read Shakespeare. You don't need any education to read Shakespeare. Just listen to it. To be or not to be? That is the question. So very often the structure of the sentence tells you a very straightforward subject that then the rest of the speech will go on to discuss. When Macbeth has killed Duncan, he doesn't come out and say some grandiose thing. He just says, "I have done the deed." All monosyllables, all tiny words. Now, tiny words are often words that people are very old words, because it seems that the more elaborate we got and extravagant with our speech, the more we invented words like extravagant. But small words are the words like rude words, like curses, like oh shit, or kill, or dead. Short words often hold old meaning. So I have done the deed doesn't just mean I've done the deed. I have made the breakfast. It's I have done the deed. It's like you can't even dare to say the thing you've done. So it doesn't take long to feel that the person speaking is having huge emotional difficulty while saying something simple. And I think once you get onto the game of that, Shakespeare becomes really your best friend, not just to the actor, but to the person at home.
That's Mark Rylance said something recently about, actually, he said the opposite. He said that people read it too slow, and they've got too much kind of reverence for his words, and that really actually you should just kind of bounce along with it. And I know that you've been interested in rhythm, but do you think then there's a right way to read Shakespeare?
No, when I mean slow down and don't be frightened by what you're reading. Of course, in the end, it bounces along probably faster than we're speaking now. But what it really is his external thought. So, if it were to be or not to be, that's the question. Well, obviously, I'm not even thinking fast enough to be up. But if I can really think, to be or not to be, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is noble in the mind, well, the word mind has got to mean something, because it's up here. Whether it's nobler in the mind to suffer the stings and arrows of outrageous fortune. Sometimes you can be quoting life, if you like. So you can go at any rhythms that excite you. And that's what I like, is that you can, Mark is right in that it tumbles along once you get fluent with it. But it is as fluent as the speed of the excitement of your own thought. And I do think you've got to be an excited person. You've got to be excited to read it, because it's about exciting things like life and death. It's not about what's on telly in a minute. It is a very brilliant thing. People know all this from, studying Macbeth, but the very beginning of Macbeth is witches. Now, normally language goes ti-tum, 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 ti-tum. Or that's how we think the sonnets, no longer mourn for me when I am dead. But with the witches, he reverses it. So he uses, an anti-iambic pentameter, it's called. Well, it's not called an anti-but I think it's the opposite of an pentameter. He reverses it. So instead of going ti-tum, they go tum-ti, tum-ti. When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain, when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's also won. That will be our set of sun, where the place upon the heath there to meet with Macbeth. Fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air. The only word that doesn't scan in that whole speech is Macbeth. It sticks out. So he even puts in, a bit like Beckett, he puts in the word that just goes, So even the person who's paid their couple of pence to go and see Macbeth, they may not remember the word, but something will have lodged in their brain because we think rhythmically as well, or we behave rhythmically. You know, if you go to a party on a night and you say, God, it wasn't a very good party, it's not that the things were differently said than or said at every other party, it's that the rhythm of the evening wasn't right for you, or maybe wasn't right for everybody. Rhythm communicates a kind of an energetic frequency, and that's also at play when you read a Shakespeare play. So you're right, the characters are not described. You don't say, Macbeth, a man of 40 with a beard. He could be anything. And of course, it is in that anything that each generation finds their own Macbeth or Lady Macbeth. They find the excitement, the kind of visceral excitement. And that's why, of course, we keep on calling people Macbeths. We keep on calling, I don't know, George Bush and Mrs. Bush were called Macbeths, or Wendy Deng is a good sort of Lady Macbeth now, isn't she? She's somebody whose ambition in the world seems to be matched by a sort of sensuality and a power seeking. I don't know her at all, but this is the way in which we start. Each generation will map iconic people onto these plays, but they also should map themselves. We should also map ourselves.
Do you think that there's a sense that we have to stick to the tradition and stick to it as it was written, or are you comfortable with people being totally free with the plays?
Well, it's, you're asking a question today that I might have answered a different way 10 years ago, and I think that's good. I'm going to give a talk I'm going to talk to some people in Washington next month about Shakespeare, about the future of Shakespeare. So I've asked a hip-hop group who do Shakespeare, and also a performance artist. So they're not language people at all. The hip-hop group they took Othello here and at the Globe, and they made it their own hip-hop about Othello. Now, in theory, that is not what I would see in Shakespeare, but I do see that if the language is failing the generation, then they must take what they see in the language and turn it into whatever language they need. It might seem contradictory. The thing that Shakespeare can give a young person is an empowerment once they feel empowered by language. But the empowerment of language is merely the ability to see how vulnerable we are as people anyway. So you shouldn't use the power of language to go, I will quote Shakespeare to you and I will have some power over you. That is absolutely the opposite of what it's there for. It's there to say, how sweet the moonlight sits upon this bank, here we will sit. It's there to paint pictures that allow us to just be, and it gives us permission to have been failed humans. And it's actually, I think it probably should be nearer Chekhov than it often is allowed to be. It doesn't communicate easily, in my experience, if it's too internal, because the language has a generosity in it that asks you to match it. So, if you say, sorry, I'm trying to think of something very suitable. I pray you tarry, pause a day or two before you hazard, for in choosing wrong I lose your company, therefore forbear a while. Something tells you, but it is not love, I would not lose you, and you know yourself, hate counsels not. Well, it starts to sort of blur. So you do need to go, I pray you tarry, pause a day or two. You can put a pause where there's a pause, or you can play with the very structure of it. So if you take a speech like Lady Macbeth's, yet do I fear thy nature, 'tis too full of the milk of human kindness to catch the nearest way. Thou wouldst be great, art not without ambition, but without the ambition, but without the illness would attend it. This is kind of high blown, but it's somebody really carefully kind of chiseling words to dare to say a thing she has never said before. And, it wasn't that the Elizabethans did that more than us. You've got to hold on to the fact that he did plays in modern dress about people who are modern, and emotionally the world doesn't move an inch in 500, 400 years. So you've got to find a way of using a language that he sort of invented, because nor were people in Islington in 400 years ago going, Glamis thou art and Cawdor. Nobody was. It's a way of turning language to its most intense. But if you are intense, and that's why I think actors are the people who are meant to be able to do that, the intensity of your feeling will suddenly match the language and it'll sound normal. And I think the same with the reader at home. if you feel strongly about something, you'll find your feeling will be matched in people in these plays.
Yeah, and the production that you did with Richard II in 1995, which is such a wonderful production, was obviously very controversial at the time. And why do you think that was, other than the obvious reason that it was a woman playing Richard?
I think at the time, I thought it was every other reason except that it was a woman playing Richard. I now think it was because it was a woman playing Richard. But at the time, I felt that what had happened in England is that history plays became the stuff of history. And they're not, they're the stuff of plays. So there were also objections to some of my British Africans who played my courtiers, that there were no Africans in the court of Richard II. So, you know, it's hard to believe it's only 20 years ago and how different the world was. But there was an objection that women, you know, next thing they'll be playing John of Gaunt. But of course, next thing they are playing John of Gaunt. Now, it doesn't mean that every woman can play every man. You know, Mark Rylance is very good at playing women. Not every actor is, but he is. And it's something to do with a kind of magical androgyny that he can conjure. And I don't think I could play every man, but I was able to play Richard II, because oddly Richard II isn't much of a man and is a sort of girly man. So often it was played by a man who would play Richard II as a camp man. That's different to playing a girly man. So it was controversial, but it was also very admired in that I think people were delighted to not be able to see what they thought they were going to see. You know, there should be magic in the theatre. And I think actually there's been a huge conservative swing in the last 15 years. I have felt incredibly disappointed that things didn't go way beyond that Richard II to something much wilder. It went backwards. But I think now there's a pendulum swing again. And I'm a big admirer of my friend Freda Lloyd's Prison Julius Caesar all-women cast, because she created a context in which all the characters, who are the most unlikely casting in the world, these female women prisoners, would be playing these heroes. So the very nature of heroism got kind of looked at. And of course, those actors had to work very hard to getting the text communicated. But when they did do it, it was really wonderful.
And there's the kind of, sometimes I feel there's a play between sticking to something and playing it as it should be, which in some ways has some benefits. But then on the other hand, is he the writer who really you can just take to all kind of places, because the language is so open to interpretation in that very generous way?
Yeah, I mean, it really is open to interpretation. I've seen a lot of productions in Salzburg, and it is pitiful that England, in its meanness and in its closed-borderness and in its arrogance and in its anti-Europeanness, we don't invite productions from Europe here. We feel they can't tell us anything about Shakespeare or anything else in the theatre. And it just isn't the case. We're quite behind on design often compared to European productions. Now, things have to communicate. I saw a fantastic Midsummer Night's Dream at the Salzburg Festival some years ago. They were not so upset about the language of Midsummer Night's Dream, so there were rockets flying off. Puck was flying out of the kind of rockets. He was a firework that used to go off everywhere. The mechanicals were very physical because they were more in touch with the Italian system. You know, so things were influencing their Shakespeare in a different way. I've seen Coriolanus with real horses, and you know, where the spectacle of it is just vast because it was in German. These things throw your view of it. We don't need to always do it in the Donmar Warehouse or in the Olivier Theatre the way we do it. And we don't necessarily always get it right, and we are often admired. The Americans often admire the English because there's a fluency with it. So of course it's open to interpretation. Children should do anything they like with it. Take a word and bash it. I think, unbeknownst to us, we're always taking it and using it as a political tool of what education should be or not. And immediately, if you communicate that to children, you've lost them.
I was having an argument with my mother last night, because I said that I was interviewing you and we were talking about her favourite play is The Taming of the Shrew. Yeah. And I think many people have this argument about what happens with the ending in which she kind of says, oh, all right then, I'll be a wife and, you know, it'll all be nice. Which I think a lot of people try to do with you know, works of art that are slightly older, in that they try and put the current moral framework, impress it onto it. And so my mother was saying, no, actually it's really positive. She thinks it's really positive, and she kind of understands the complexities of marriage, and it's her decision to do that. And I was saying, yes, but you know, I mean, there are some pretty hairy lines in there, and at the end of the day, she's kind of saying, all right, you're the master. Do you think that we should have a kind of reverence for the context in which he was writing and the world in which he was writing? There's so many of his plays that are so controversial with our modern kind of eyes, but at the same time, there's always an underlying, very humanist kind of line in Shakespeare that he has, I think he was far ahead of his time in many ways.
It's got a battle of the sexes in it, and people really relate to that always, you know. Good morrow, Kate, for that's your name, I hear. Well, have you heard? There's something hard of hearing. They call me Catherine, that talk of me. She takes him on in language, but really she wants her name back. He says Kate, she says Catherine. There's a deeper dialogue in it, and at the end, of course, he has also conceded something to her. But thy husband is thy lord, thy life, thy keeper, thy head, thy sovereign, one that cares for thee, and for thy maintenance commits his body to painful labour both by sea and land, to watch the night in storms, the day in cold, while thou liest warm at home, secure and safe, and craves no other from the other hand but fair looks and good obedience. Something. I mean, it's ludicrous in a way, because there's no man in that play who's been on sea and land. There's no hint that Petruchio has been farming or working hard, or so there's a kind of game or description of idealism being bandied by both of them. It's the only play, I think, that has genuinely got, which Shakespeare doesn't tend to have, a sort of subtext, which is what you see is not what you hear, and that their attraction to each other has to be harnessed in some way by him in that context. But, you know, I don't want to limit Shakespeare, but there's no doubt that he lived in his time. So his concentration generally is on men, but he writes women very well. But he doesn't write them equally. They're equal as people, because he can't help but, he's fantastic at conjuring them. But he's not as interested in them. I mean, the thing I was trying to say about Europe is that they are so often beyond what the story of the play is. They want to do something that abstracts the story. That is not to my taste either. I want the thing clear. I want to understand people. Plays are not about themes, they're about people. And the people are conjured in front of you, miraculously in poetry, if it's Shakespeare's case, or in ordinary speech. But I must see people. I must see layers of people, like splices of their mind, or I don't want anyone reduced to one thing, because the moment they are that, we may as well not watch them. However, if you live in a time where women will not sit back and enjoy somebody saying, thy husband is thy lord, thy life. When I did it, people used to boo. I was thrilled. Thy keeper, thy head, they were going boo, because they couldn't bear that this person was relinquishing so much after such a long evening to this man. And I think that's fair enough. They must answer from who they are in their time. The plays must happen now. You mustn't have retrospective theatre. And I think a lot of it is slightly more retrospective, unlike art that sometimes can be slightly out of your reach. You think, God, I wish I could understand that painting. There's a very funny yellow next to a blue. And in 10 years' time, you're used to that yellow and a blue. In the theatre, it's got to happen that second. And that is often, I think with Richard II, we were on the cusp of that. People were frightened of what they were seeing. It was actually a very classical production. They could understand every line that was being said, every relationship was correct. But they were going, oh my God, you know, there's the wrong gender in there. But you can push one thing. But if you'd had, you know, a whole lot of tortoises playing the lords, maybe it would start to lose meaning. So it's this balance between yielding meaning, revealing meaning, and hiding meaning. And the problem with theatre is got to always deliver meaning.
And if you got the chance again to play Shakespeare, is there a character you'd ever really love to play?
Yes. I would like to play Cleopatra with Mark Rylance as Antony.
Oh, that would be good.
There are phenomenal lines in Shakespeare that, you know, I am dying, Egypt, dying. You don't need ever to have gone to Egypt to feel what that means when she says Egypt. You think, suddenly the word Egypt has a meaning way beyond the country of Egypt. There's a conjuring magic in the language, she says. That was an Anthony. The very name Anthony suddenly is way beyond David Beckham. It's got a kind of, she has, there's a sort of an aeration of the way in which she speaks that's not like any other character. The other thing that Shakespeare does is that when we say Shakespeare plays, they are all remarkably different. There's a different vocabulary in each one. There's a tendency towards animals and birds and Coriolanus. There's, different colours seem to occur in certain plays. So his ability to wipe the previous play he's written and to start again with a new language is unparalleled.
Mm-hmm. And this, finally, this is a hard question now. If you had to pick that kind of feeling that you get when you do see Shakespeare on the stage, could you pick a verse or even a line or a section that you felt really strongly did that from you? A favourite
speech? A favourite speech? Well, this is going back into my life rather than, I'm sure there are probably better examples than the one I'm going to give you. But when in As You Like It, Rosalind, who's been pretty screwed up by being kicked out into a forest to find her father, runs away with her cousin, and snarled up by that situation, and speaks pretty snarly language actually at the beginning of it. And Celia goes with her and stays talking a very sort of syllogistic language, Well, my cousin. And Rosalind seems to get freer from being in the landscape of Arden, which, just match that to any freedom, drugs or something, or some other place. Freedom from the patriarchy, whatever it is that you want to call it. Freedom from family, freedom from being a girl even. She says to Orlando, no, Orlando, men are April when they woo, December when they wed. Maids are May when it is May, but the sky changes when they are wives. It's not the line, it's the line after you've had a whole act of repression and people stuck in castles or homes with uncles and abuse and fathers. And then these two girls go out into the Forest of Arden. And I think it probably hit me at the moment in which I was going out into a Forest of Arden. I think that's probably why, if I ever wrote my biography, I think As You Like It was the play in which I also went out into the Forest of Arden. And the Forest of Arden being a place where suddenly you're freed of your life, your previous life, and the rules of life. The line is full of an openness that she could not have had earlier in the play. It's full of an openness of vowels. It's prose. It's not in verse. It has a huge thought in it, which is you get the maids being May and the wives being, why? You've got the end of the beginning of a year and an end of a year. And you've got a fluency and a sort of daring and an anarchy all in one thought that really, she literally, had she stayed in that house with her uncle, she'd never been able to say. And I think that is what I most enjoy seeing about people who've travelled or gone somewhere. They come back and say things they could never have said before. And then they've moved on. But in a play, you actually watch them and through the night. You move with them and they move. It can also happen in tragedies that Medea, who jokes about the lunacy of maybe killing a child at the beginning, kills her children at the end. You watch in a concertinaed amount of time a person moving from being one type of person to another. And, As You Like It is a wonderful play, I think, now, because what I think we're on the brink of discovering, and I'm looking forward to reading about it, is that, we never had the notion of the words of gender fluidity. And there was Shakespeare playing with it 400 years ago. That people dressing as a boy, whilst in Rosalind's case maybe holding on to her girlishness, lose something of their girlishness as they became a boy, and they will never be the same kind of woman again. That was already there. So, but I hope somebody will match the radicalism of where we are now with that play. It'd be very interesting.
Well, thanks very much for talking to us today, Fiona. It was very interesting.
Pleasure.